In this coding module, we're going to build out our search panel and we're going to add some events so that we can filter our data. So you can see here we have our functional component, that's a search panel. It's just static at the moment. We need to make this interactive. Once it recompiles there, we can see the button is there. We're going to want to build out a click handler for the onClick event. We'll click the button, we would need to handle it. So we're going to create a function called handleClick. We'll use a functional expression with the arrow function, ES6 plus arrow function. We're going to do a quick alert using the window.alert, just so we can test that this is working. So in JSX React world, we can use the onClick. It needs to be camel case, first word is lowercase followed by the uppercase click. And then we can use the braces and then we can reference our function handleClick. And if we click it, we can see the alert. So that's wired up and it's working. We also would like to track when our drop-down selection has changed. So we're going to create another function named handleSelectChange using the arrow keyword. In the same way, we're going to use the window.alert to test that this is working. We need to use the same approach. So we can add the onChange event with the braces and then reference that function. So you can see when it changes now, the event fires and we can alert. We know both of these events are working. Next up, we also want an event to track when the key is pressed. So as the user is typing into our input box, we would like to track that as well. And we're going to wire up the onKeyDown event in our input box, and we're going to wire it up in the same way. And then reference the handleKeyPress function. Maybe we'll rename this to handleKeyDown. So we reference our handleKeyDown function. So as we're typing, you'll see that alert is being triggered. So now we need to go ahead and implement this. So within every event, there is this synthetic event object that gets passed. So oftentimes people will call it E or event. So we can handle this event. On this event is a lot of information of what triggered the event. In this case, it's the input control. So we can actually track via event code which key has been pressed. So you can see there when we trigger a key change here, it'll give us a numeric value for our code. When we press the enter key, 13. The key code for the enter key is 13. We can add a conditional code here that when the code is 13, which is the enter key, only then will we search, because we don't want to be triggering a search every time we're typing. So this would be a custom key that would trigger a filter or some type of call, API call. Now when I press the enter key alert is triggered. Next up, we are going to use something called hooks. We need to add some state to our little search panel. We need to track the current state of the text. What's really interesting about the useState hook, it'll give us two parameters. It'll give us the state to update and a way to update it. So in our case, we have search text and we have a mechanism to set the search text. By default, it's going to be empty string. By using this hook, now we can track at any time our component will track the current state of the search text. Why this is important is because when React updates, the virtual DOM will redraw certain aspects of our search component. And sometimes in that case, we can lose state. So our component could actually lose track of the current text in that text box. So what's interesting about the synthetic event is it has, I said, a lot of attributes. So we can say e.target.value. The target is the input box and the value is what is inside of it. So we're going to grab what's inside of the input box and set that to an internal state for our search text box. The reason why we're doing this is because eventually we would like to pass this search text back to the parent component, which is the crypto dashboard, because we would like to pass that back so that parent component can do the filtering. So that's where we're going with this. So we need to set the value of the text box to the search text. Why do we want to do this? Because inherently every HTML control has its own state. So we need to control the state. We need to take control of the input state. That is why we're setting the value to the search text. So we've actually going to split two event handlers out. We're going to have the handle key down only have one concern. His concern will be just to trigger the search. Then we're going to add another event handler for handle on change. And this is going to set the value of the search text. So we have two search handlers, which is allowed on each input box. So we have on key down and on change. Remember, JavaScript is very event driven. So an input box could have different types of events that get triggered. So on key down, we'll track the search. On change, we'll track the state of the search text in the input control. So now we have two things interacting. Now we have two functions. When search is triggered, eventually what we would like to do is filter the list. However, one of the problems is that the list exists in the parent component. So we run into a situation where the search text is isolated inside the child component, but we would like to filter this crypto coins that live in the parent component. This is actually a very common problem in React when you have nested components. How do they communicate with each other? If you recall, props are one unidirectional way to pass data down, but how do we get data up to the parent? There's a couple different ways to do it, but out of the box, one way to do it is through events. So we can create a new function for handle search. And what we're going to do with this function is we're actually going to pass it in as a prop to the child component. So let me explain. When you do this, you're going to pass it by reference. So you're passing a reference of the function in the prop to the child component. And the child component will then use that prop and trigger the function as if you would normally invoke a normal function. So it's kind of tricky to understand, but what we're going to do here is we're going to name this prop search callback. And we're going to use the braces and we're going to reference that new function handle search that lives in the parent component. The props from the object, and we have the search callback. By passing this through, it's going to be part of that props object. Child component will have access to all of these properties. Back in the child component for search panel, we're going to add props in that functional parameter of the component and the arrow functions, and now we have access to this prop object. So what we want to do is in our handle key down, in the case where enter has been performed, this is where we want to trigger that little function call because we want to test that it's wired up first. We need to call the callback here. And eventually, we need to pass back the current state of the search input text box. We need to pass back the search text to the callback eventually. But let's just see if this is working first. Props.search callback and the search text, which is in state. So let's try this out. I'm going to hit enter here. So we made a mistake here. Actually, we were trying to pass this callback to the crypto card. We need to update the prop to be on the search panel. So now we can see once we made that adjustment, when we press enter, parent received data from the child component. So this is working now. So this prop search callback is actually working. We just needed to make sure that it was being a property on the search panel component. So now we have a mechanism checking for the search, for the enter keyword. And now we can kind of, because we have more than one line of code, we need to put the braces in and we can kind of roll all of this into the conditional just for the enter keyword. So it's really great here as we have the state working as we're typing all of this data. This is a test. When we hit enter, it's going to pass it back. So now we have the parent knowing and communicating with the child component. In fact, the child component is passing data back upstream instead of downstream only. So now we have a situation where we can communicate, but we're not using props to do this. We're using callbacks and events to pass the data from the child component back up to the parent component. So we also want to add the callback as well on the search button in case we have the enter key on the search, which is pretty common, but also the user could trigger the search with the button itself. I will note that the more complicated this type of communication gets, then you may need to look, if you have a very big application, you may look at state providers such as Context API or Redux, those types of things. But for our application where we have one level of components, this is perfectly fine to use out of the box and common to use. It's when you get 10 levels deep and you have 100 components or 200 components, then you need to look at a state provider to do this type of state management for you. So we have a good situation here. We have the data coming back from the text box. Now, if we have Bitcoin in the search text, we can filter our crypto coin array list by the search text. We could use state here as well because we need to also use this hook. We need to use the use state hook. The reason why we need to do it is because as we're filtering our array, we need to keep track of the current state of that array. Meaning that if we have Bitcoin filtered and we only have one card, we may have some other mechanisms in our application, like a favorite button or something like that, that will re-trigger the virtual DOM, and we don't want to lose our filtered data. We want to have a consistent state. We're going to create coin data and set coin data. Perhaps we could call it filtered data eventually, but we're going to start with coin data and set coin data. We're going to use state and we're going to default it to an empty array. So it's empty list. Actually, my mistake. We're going to default it to the crypto coins. So in memory, we'll always have the default list. Why do we want to do this? In case we clear our search filter, we need to roll back to the whole list. Eventually, this will be coming from an API. If somebody hits enter with no search criteria, we would like to just render out the whole list again. So we may have two running lists here. We may have the default list of the full list, and we may have a filtered list. So eventually what we're going to do is we're going to have a filtered list. And the way you can do it easily with ES6 Plus is they have a whole bunch of utility methods to help us with arrays in general. Always look at the web documents online for JavaScript. So if you use a dot notation, you'll see coindata.filter. It takes a function or predicate that we can give it. So we can use an arrow function here. So each iteration, it'll be a coin. It works similar to the mapping, but this time we're filtering. So we're going to actually filter the coin name by the search text that we received from the child component. So then we have a new array of filtered coins. So now that we have a list of filtered coins, we need a way of re-rendering the update. We need a way to let JSX know and React know that we have a new filtered list we would like to have rendered. So we could set the coin data to filtered coins, and this should work. However, we'll lose the default list. So we're going to have two lists running. But you'll see here, because we've overwritten the default list. This is a problem here, because now if we search Ethereum, so the problem here is we don't have a running default list. Every time we was searching, we were emptying out that list. So right now, probably in memory, it's an empty array. So we don't want this. If you notice on refresh, the whole list appears again. So we need to fix this. Perhaps a better approach might be on the coin itself using some string utilities. So we can use coin.name.contains. So we're actually doing a better partial search, because if we're just typing bit or Ethereum, partially will not match our search text. So we may need to use some of these string utilities to help us with partial searches. So let's try this out. If we refresh, we get the full list. If we do some partial searches here, you'll see here we search coin. We can see in our console log that we're outputting the result set as well. This looks like it's working properly. If you notice, we did change the crypto coins in the filter coin statement. So that's also helping as well. Ethereum, ETH. Now we're picking some things up. So we're filtering a lot better now. We can remove some of these alerts. Some gauge in here where perhaps we're going to search if the search text is empty. If the search text is empty, we don't need to filter it. We can maybe return, or maybe we could put some validation here to just say, hey, you need to enter some data. And then we can return out of the function, so we don't need to set state or filter unnecessarily. So we're going to type a nice message, enter a crypto coin to search. And then we need to return, exit out of the execution, so we're not setting state here. So we can test this out. We have a nice little alert. Again, we can improve the validation UI eventually, but we have something that's working now. It's filtering, it's setting state. We're getting data from the child. Let's see how this works here. So we'll try to type this out here. We'll search Tether. Fantastic, we have one card. So this is a point you saw the little bit of a bug. We may need to reset the full list. If somebody press enters, we might need to set the coin data back to the original list, which is crypto coins. So we'll reset our search filter. So let's try this out here. So we have full list resets. We have the full list again. Fantastic. If we filter down, we'll put Shiba Inu or just Shiba. We have one coin. We have coin. We have 5 record sets here. We have empty string or Doge casing soon. Dogecoin works. And then if we have no search text, it gives us the full list. So we have something filtering here and working pretty well.